Hey, welcome back everyone. So here we are. Today we're gonna be talking about how to set up your car. Quite specifically how to go faster with custom setups. Why you wanna avoid the default setups as much as you can, and well, let's see what changes we can do. So what we did, if you haven't watched the WOD for the past an hour and a half or two, we were quite going about the setups, testing out different things to see what works and what doesn't work. And we arrived at Spain. Why? It's the testing track anyway, right? So if you want to be testing your downforce, your aero, all kind of things, Spain is usually a good track to do it. So we started off with the preset number 2, which is the increased downforce setup here. And the preset has a 33, 36, 36 wings, quite equal wings. Doesn't mean it's bad, doesn't mean it's good either. 65 transmission, which is a bit more understeer and exit, a bit safer. 55 off throttle, again to keep the rear a bit more stable throughout the cornering phase. It tends to be a bit more understeer as well. So you'll notice the general trend in all kind of preset setups. It's always made to be a bit more understeer than usual, so that it's easy to drive. You don't have to worry about oversteer. It's much easier to manage understeer than to manage oversteer for beginners or people who are just starting out in the game. Suspension geometry, this is the default. I quite like the front and rear camber actually. Maybe it might have some usages in some tracks, but again, somewhere in the middle, front camber gives you mid corner grip a bit more. Rear camber as well gives you a bit more mid corner responsiveness. Front toe out, it gives you a bit sharper entry, but mid corner it may understeer. Rear toe in, on the default, it's very in, right? That's a lot of rear toe in. That's going to give you a lot of stability while cornering, while putting down the power, but it's also going to cause a lot of understeer. So no bueno. Bad setup, all right? Bad toe, you don't want that. Suspension. Now the golden rule here is you want to leave the suspension you want to leave the suspension as stiff as possible for the front suspension. That is because, well, in this year's game, at least with the physics changes and updates, having a stiff front suspension helps with the stability of the car and the front of your car as well. I found that the lowest you could go in the Monza test that we did in the previous video. By the way, if you haven't checked that out, you can check it out, how to increase your top speed in the game, what to do and what not to do. Link in the top right. So we found out that you can go as low as 25 in extreme conditions like in Monza, and it will not affect your top speed at all. So extrapolate that information to other tracks where you're not going to reach that top speed of Monza or Baku, right? You can run around 25 to 30, the softest, in some medium to high speed tracks. In slower speed tracks, maybe 20, it's possible, depending on the rest of the setup. But if you're looking for a number to start off, right, you want to start off at 30. Okay, so but otherwise, somewhere like Spain, Spa, what else is Spa in Spain? Silverstone, it's another high speed track. Paul Ricard, it's also another high speed, but it's not so high speed, but there are a lot of high speed corners there as well. So you can leave the front suspension at maximum firmness, right? Full to the right, 41. And rear suspension, default is okay actually. You can run between 10 to 15. In my test, I found it to be okay. You don't want to go any lower than that. It starts to make the car a lot more stable actually, but it gets prone to oversteer on exit because the rear is too soft and the rear will bottom out. So keep it as it is on default here. So default here is 11. Should be okay. Track to track, custom setup, you can always change it. Front roll bar, again, sort of similar to the front suspension, but instead of like controlling the ride of your car, it also helps to control the behavior of your car while cornering. So a stiffer anti-roll bar is going to give you a sharper initial response, but the car is going to be understeering in longer corners. So like Stowe, Cops, it might understeer It might be sharp on entry, but it might understeer on exit, so you might need to lower it just 1 or 2 click just to get the right balance. When you go too soft though, the car might not even want to turn into the corner. Although going softer usually means it's easier to turn in, but not necessarily the case always. So you want to leave it somewhere in between. 11 actually is somewhere right in between, just nice. Actually, you can run this on all tracks. I'd rather adjust the rear and roll bar if I need to. I'll go up if I need a bit more responsiveness in high speed corners. I want the rear to rotate a bit more. If I want the rear to be a bit more stable, less rotation, less oversteer, I'll go down. So that's what you'll probably need to do. A front right height as low as possible that you need in all tracks. A preset is pretty high, 3640, given that it's a downforce circuit, so it's naturally going to have a lot more load in the car. So downforce plus the speed that you're going through the track, it's gonna require you have a bit of ground clearance so that the floor of your car doesn't bottom out. Once you bottom out, you lose all kind of grip, so you want to avoid that. So higher is better in some cases, but not too high. In Spain, we find out that 3340 is just nice for now. Meta might shift, performance patches might come out and whatnot. It will be updated soon. So go as low as you can, but without bottoming out. If you notice like you go too low on the rear, you go through turn 3, you will just spin out. So your solution is just go up until you stop spinning out. So 3340 is sort of like the balance here. Then again, it's a default setup, so possible to go lower, but you might have to balance out with the rest of the setup. Brakes, again, general rule is not to say general, it's a mandatory thing. If you don't run 100% brake pressure, something's wrong with you. Uninstall the game. Get out of the game. All right. 100% brake pressure is needed so that you get maximum performance of your braking. Brake bias though, you don't want to be running 62, 63, anything in the 60s. If anything, the highest you might be running is like 58 in some tracks where there's a lot of rear tire wear, like Baku, Canada, throughout the state maybe. But otherwise, you can run 56, 55 in most tracks. And the rule of thumb here is, if it's a heavy braking zone, go higher. So go like 57 maybe for turn 1 in Monza, turn 4 in Monza. It's heavy braking, so you want it to be stable. You don't want the rear to oversteer, step out, right? So keep it higher. Maybe slower corners, like say if you're still in Silverstone, you could go to Stowe, you can go lower like 53, 54. Whereas in Monza, like in Ascari, Parabolica, you can go down to 53, 54 as well, because you don't need to dab. You don't need to hold the brakes too much. You just need to dab on the brakes very quickly, right? So that's going to keep your car stable and give you more turning. So rule of thumb, 53, 54 should be okay for just dabbing in certain corners. 55, 56, 57 is absolutely needed for heavy braking. 58, very limited usage, but it's still usable. Tires, keep it as low as you can. You want it to be as low as possible in this game, so that your pressure, your tire temperatures or carcass temperatures don't exceed a certain temperature. Again, we'll probably talk about tires separately. How to get the ideal tire range for each track and whatnot, or when you're setting up. But leave it as low as possible. If you feel that, if you find that your tires are overheating despite these default low pressures, just keep going lower. You might even have to run minimum pressures, and you'll be fine with tire temperatures. Even with minimum tire pressures, you're overheating your tires, you're probably driving bad. So get good, drive better, drive smoother, learn the racing lines, brake earlier maybe, and then accelerate a bit smoother until you find the comfort zone and start pushing the limits. That's the way you can do it. Okay, so now back to this preset here. Now what we have done, a bit of explaining here and there. How do you convert this into a working custom setup? And surprisingly, while I was doing my tests, I ended up with almost the same setup as the world record setup. So I could have just taken the world record setup and worked my way backwards, and I would have ended in the same place. But nevertheless, it's a good finding to know that what we are trying is actually working around here. So first things first, you're going to notice that brake bias is going to be the first thing you want to change. Spain, for example, you could run 55 the entire way, 56 to be safer. Some tracks maybe 57, but whatever it is, you want to be running around this range, 58 all the way down to 55, depending on corners, right? So start higher when you're practicing so that you don't oversteer, and then you can dial it down lap by lap or corner by corner if you're getting more comfortable. Tires, leave it as it is. And then the next thing you want to change, number one, first I said brakes, right? Number two, transmission. You want to lower your on throttle transmission to 55. Why 55? It's sort of the sweet spot for getting acceleration, getting traction, and also rotating the car at the same time. So if you go low on throttle, it generally allows your rears to rotate at different speeds. Rear will rotate more as a result. It will be more difficult to straighten out the car, right? So it's more prone to oversteer while you're putting down the power, but at the same time it's going to allow your rear to rotate a bit more. So if you need that in certain corners, you go higher, it's going to introduce a bit of understeer while you're accelerating. Not too much, just enough to make sure the car isn't like pointing to a tree. It's just straighter on exit. So 55 or 60 is generally where you want to run for your race setups. 50 in qualifying might work at certain tracks, but 55 is the sweet spot. So if you have no questions about this, why, how this works, blah blah blah, just leave it at 55. Off throttle though, you want to be running it at 50 for qualifying sessions to gain the maximum lap time out of it. 51, 52 is usable and recommended in some cases, maybe even 53 or 54 like Baku, so that the rears do not slide too much, and it looks after the rear tires as well. Temperatures are lowered because you're sliding less, the wear is reduced because you're sliding less. So otherwise keep it at 50, maybe 51 if you feel the car is a bit unstable on braking entry and whatnot. Suspension geometry. Now what other changes that we did to this, this was the third thing that we changed, right? We changed the suspension geometry to right, left. So like I said, this is still working in this game. Minimum camber, minimum toe. It keeps the car more stable. It doesn't affect straight line speed anymore like it did in the last games. So again, you can use this to customize your setup, fine tune it bit by bit. Front camber is minimum so that you get better entry response. You may get slight understeer in mid corner, but you can dial that out slowly by maybe going one click at a time. Rear camber also the same. Front toe out, you want to keep it as low as possible so that it's more stable. You go higher, it is going to be more sharp on the turn in, right? But it may understeer in long corners. So keep it low, it's going to be overall better for your driving. Same for rear toe. Except that going higher actually is more stable, but you want it to be lower so that the rear of your car can rotate a lot more, especially in slow speed corners. You're going to be losing a lot of time if you have too much rear toe in. Suspension, you want to look into the suspension as well. Things that you can change in a custom setup, from a default setup to a custom setup. You can always go down on the front right hand immediately, so that the car is a bit more responsive, gives you a bit more front end grip, which is usually lacking in the default setup. But say something like maybe the increased top speed or top speed setup, they have like right height like this, right? And you feel if you go any lower, you're probably going to be hitting the curbs. So instead of reducing the front right height, you can increase the rear right height to give you a bit more cornering speed, cornering performance as well. More turn in, more rotation. So it's the same. Either you reduce the front or you increase the rear. It's going to give you about the same effect, right? And you want to go as low as possible without bottoming out on curbs. If you run over curbs and the car is just like scraping and losing time, you might have to go higher on the right height. And then you don't have to really touch much on the suspension and anti-roll bars. For now, you can leave it at default. That's because it seems to work for some good reason this year, this default suspension is really working out. Apart from the ride height, which you have to adjust, everything else seems to work out. You just have to make minor tweaks here and there. So just use the default, might be okay. If you have understeer or oversteer, we can solve it out just by a few clicks here and there. Well, when we go into specific track setups, of course, and a more in-depth setup later on. Brakes that we have spoken about, tire pressures, leave it as it is. And the most important of all, aerodynamics. You want to make sure the aerodynamics of your car are set up correctly also, so that you get good amount of stability through the rear wing as you're going through high speed corners, and good amount of front grip and turn in through the front wing. So in general, I'm just saying in general here, +6 front wing compared to rear. So +6, +7 is a good number to be at if you are adjusting the what's this called, preset setups. It's going to give you a lot more front grip, and you won't be losing any time at all, if anything, on the straights, because front wing is very efficient for the amount of downforce it produces. It produces very little drag, whereas the rear wing, for every click of downforce you add on, yes, it adds on more downforce also, but it generates a lot more drag than the front wing. So use the rear wing to get the stability of your car. How confident you want to be on throttle, you may have to increase your rear wing. If you're sliding in high speed corners, you may need more rear wing. And then to get the turning into the corners, slow speed or high speed, long corners, you'll have to increase your front wing to get the good amount of cornering performance here. So after a lot of blip blobs and babbles, what can we summarize if you want to convert a preset into a working custom setup? So first thing, maybe let's just start from aerodynamics. Go +6 on the front wing, then whatever it is on the default here, or alternatively you can always reduce the rear wing also, maybe by 5 or 6 to get the same effect. Of course, take into account if it's a high downforce track, you probably want to increase the front wing. If it's a low downforce track, you can probably get away with maybe +3 front, -3 rear. You're gonna get about the same effect, right? So just find what works for you, which one gives you the most lap time, and maybe you can adjust +1 or -1 from there. So I'll say just go +6. Transmission, always stick to 55 on throttle. It is the safest for all tracks, all conditions. In the race, maybe while your tires are starting to wear out, you can go 60, 65. It will help to reduce the burden on the rear tires while you're going on power. Off throttle, keep it at 50 for qualifying. 51 and 52 maybe is usable for race conditions, although it's yet to be fully tested, but it definitely works from the limited tests I've done. I haven't tested out 53, 54 for like extreme situations like Baku or Canada where the rear tires wear out a lot, but it definitely helps to preserve your rear tires a bit more and your tires in general. Suspension geometry, right, left is safe to use in all tracks, all conditions. Again, there might be some time, because we're still early into the game, there might be time in a certain kind of a suspensions geometry setup, maybe more camber, 1 or 2 clicks, blah blah blah, maybe some toe combined with maybe some extra front wing, and all that might work out. We're still finding out exploits in some terms to make the setups work better for us. So for now, you can stick to this and you're good to go in your custom setup. Suspension for a high-speed track like Spain, Spa, China even, where you have a lot of high-speed corners and you have to take while accelerating and turning as well, you'll need some stability in your front. So keeping it at maximum is actually beneficial even at most tracks. Maybe in Monaco you'll be probably going like 25, 20, even that should be probably the lowest you'll go in the entire calendar. And yeah, you can stay at 41. Rear suspension relative to the front, if you're going soft, let's say very soft like -10, maybe you just want to go down 1 or 2 clicks to maintain the same balance. Otherwise, you know, if it is at default, leave it at default. Although if you do find yourself like needing a bit more traction out of slower corners, you can experiment with lowering your rear suspension one at a time. But if you go too low, you'll start to notice you'll get even more oversteer, which is counterintuitive, right? That's because your rear is bottoming out, so you'll probably have to raise your ride height to counter that off, which may not be again a good idea for straight line speed. So again, somewhere in between, it's just fine. 10, 11, 10 to 15 actually, not much effect. You don't notice the straight line speed loss also, so which is a good thing. So keep it at default, it's just nice actually. Front anti-roll bar, again at default, somewhere in between is just nice. 11 to 15. Even lower range is actually okay. 6, 7, 8. I'll prefer to go a bit lower if possible for tracks where they have a lot more slower corners. But in general, if you're confused, leave it in the middle and you're fine to go. Anti-roll bar on the rear. You can use this to increase your rotation by increasing the rear anti-roll bar. If you want more stability, you know, like mid corner it's turning in too much, or it's too responsive in a quick direction change, something which probably may not happen, but if it is, you can lower your rear anti-roll bar. It's going to be a bit more understeery in that sense. Now, ride height, like we've already discussed, we started off like with 3640 on the preset here, but again, specifically for Spain, I went down to 33. That's because as you go lower, the front of your car sits lower to the ground. That gives you more grip on the front when you're cornering. It's lower, more downforce is generated, right? But too low, and you will be hitting the floor basically. The floor of your car, you know, the nose of your car will be hitting the floor of the road or whatever it is. You know, they're in contact and scraping, and there's no airflow. No airflow means no downforce. So as low as you can, but not too low. So sweet spot for most circuits so far is like 33, 37, 33, 36. Barcelona, maybe you need 40 because there's a lot of corners where you're going high speed and still accelerating in long corners, right? And brakes, 100% brake pressure always. That's absolutely needed in your custom setup. Even the presets are always 100%, so just follow that. Brake bias, definitely reduce it from the default brake bias that is given to you. So 58 is safe, 57 is safe, 56, 55 is also usable. 54 and 53 I only recommend if you're using it for tapping on the brakes very minimally, like just less than a second, or just tap on the brakes and then just a little bit amount of rotation, so it's enough. If heavy braking, you'll definitely need to go between 58 to 55, around there, right? The more braking you do, the more you need towards the front to keep the car stable from rocking the rear. All right, and then tire pressures, keep it as low as possible. There is no real benefit of running uber high tire pressures anymore. It only overheats the tire massively, and that is a bad thing to have in the game, right? Maybe you want minimum pressures, maybe you want slightly higher. As long as your tire pressures are within the carcass range, which we'll discuss in the next one, then you're good to go. So there you go, bibble babble done, and that's how you convert your preset into a working-ish custom setup. And there's also a bit of explanation about, you know, how each of these things works very briefly. Now, I haven't really gone into so much detail yet because I'm always afraid that Cody's will somehow release a patch that will alter the performance of the cars, which will happen, or maybe even alter the physics of the car, and you know, setups are going to be all useless. So perhaps maybe in a few months time we will revisit this and give you a more detailed guide, a more complete and definitive guide. For now, we'll all have to do with this with limited information. So good luck, have fun with your setups, and tata, take care, bye bye.